hopefully I'm in rare form when the season starts. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
I hope so. I definitely hope so too. I don't know if you know, but I get a chance to work with Kevin regularly with the Warriors, and nobody works harder and nobody's a better student. It's amazing how quickly he's able to take instruction and put it into his game. And I don't even mean, sometimes we'll work on something and I think maybe that's a lot to ask, and he'll try it in practice and then he'll do it in the game like the next night. And it's really an amazing thing to be so gifted, but also to be so open and to work so hard and to touch so many people. I just want to thank you. Thank you
Steve,
for
that compliment.
But I want to thank you on behalf of everyone for the way you handle yourself.
Thank you.
So Steve Nash was just announced as the Brooklyn Nets head coach. And when I first saw this news, I'm not going to lie, I had a very late night last night. I made it into bed at about 3 a.m. And I was like, okay, let me go to bed right now. Wake up at 3.5 hours later to the alert on my Apple Watch from Adrian Wojnarowski. And I kind of did like a double take, looked at my phone really fuzzy, and it said Steve Nash was just hired by the Brooklyn Nets as a head coach. And I thought, okay, there's no way that's real. And I just turned off my phone and I went to bed, because typically if there's news like that, I usually hop out of bed, have 6 shots of espresso, and give you guys the analysis immediately. But in this instance, I was like, okay, I must be dreaming or something. This is so bizarre. And I typically don't like making videos about head coaching situations because historically you guys aren't that interested. But this is a very, very interesting scenario, and we have to dive into it deep. Now, before we get to that, guys, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and turn on my notifications so you can be alerted about my latest NBA news videos. I'm giving away multiple copies of NBA 2K21 on my Twitter and on my Instagram account, and I live stream on Twitch on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays at 9 p.m. Pacific time. Usually these are park games with my subscribers, and we don't really pull that many viewers. So in the event that you want to come through and hang out and play a little video games with your boy, a link to that's in the description down below. It's twitch.tv/FlightMike. Now that we've got all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Before we get into this analysis about Steve Nash being hired by the Brooklyn Nets, I want to dispel this one notion about this being a racial hire, because a lot of people are upset at the fact, and I can understand this because Jacques Vaughn did a phenomenal job as the interim head coach of the Brooklyn Nets, and for that reason, they should have at least truly looked into hiring him as a head coach. But you have to understand that the position Jacques Vaughn was in, where he was in this NBA bubble with the Brooklyn Nets, that weren't actually the Brooklyn Nets. He didn't have Kevin Durant. He didn't have Kyrie Irving. He didn't have DeAndre Jordan or Wilson Chandler. He didn't have any of his typical players at all whatsoever. He had a completely new team, and it was like a D-League-like team that he coached extremely well. He didn't have Spencer Dinwiddie either. He had a team that was not technically the Brooklyn Nets, and he did a phenomenal job coaching them. But the thing is, the Brooklyn Nets recently moved on from a head coach like that. They moved on from Kenny Atkinson, a guy that was just really freaking good at getting the best out of his players and really getting the most out of their potential. And they opted to move on from him, and it's nothing against Kenny Atkinson as a head coach. It's just he wasn't the right head coach for the job. And I believe that's what the Brooklyn Nets felt about Jacques Vaughn. Jacques Vaughn may be a good coach for a young team, or a team that is counted out of most playoff series or most games, a team that is usually an underdog, or a team that's just trying to develop its players. I don't really want to speak to his stint in Orlando, but I don't think this was a racial hire, especially when you consider the fact that there's been other head coaches like Steve Nash, in the sense that Jason Kidd and also Derek Fisher, that had absolutely absolutely zero head coaching experience that were able to just make it into a head coaching situation. Same with Doc Rivers, and this is all off the top of my head. So I don't think this was racial at all. If you actually take some time to think about it, this head coaching hire makes a lot of sense, and surprisingly, it makes as little sense as it does make sense. And I'm going to start with where it doesn't make sense, because where it doesn't make any sense is the fact that you're hiring a head coach that has had zero head coaching experience to come in and coach two of the most high maintenance superstars, although very talented, but super high maintenance superstars in the NBA. And you're just hoping that it works out. Bear in mind that Steve Nash, although was a very talented basketball player, has no head coaching experience. And that's like the number one thing I'm thinking to myself. You're putting this head coach in a situation where he has to win a NBA championship with this core. He doesn't have time to go through those growing pains. And we've seen scenarios where coaches have been able to thrive in these circumstances, like Steve Kerr when he was given the Golden State Warriors. He just had to make a couple of tweaks, but he was able to use his experience with Phil Jackson and the Chicago Bulls. And he was also able to use his experience when he was a general manager in the Mike D'Antoni era, when he was Steve Nash's general manager technically around 2006, 2007. Based off of those experiences, Steve Kerr was really able to construct the ideal system to make Steph Curry the player that he is today, to put Draymond Green in a position for him to succeed, and to make the Golden State Warriors one of the best teams of the past decade. And when you look at Steve Nash, I see a lot of those same characteristics, and this is being very, very optimistic. Again, this could be Jason Kidd 2.0 when Jason Kidd was hired by the Brooklyn Nets, or when Jason Kidd was the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. And that's not to say that Jason Kidd is a horrible head coach. It's just he just needed a couple more seasons, or maybe some more seasoning, in order to become a better head coach. When you look at Steve Nash, a lot of the things that are necessary to be a good head coach are there. For example, he was the focal point of the Mike D'Antoni offense, and he was utilized. He was probably the first D'Antoni player to really successfully be utilized to his fullest potential. Mike D'Antoni took Steve Nash, put him in a system that allowed him to win back-to-back MVPs. And I know a lot of people say, yeah, Mike, so what? I don't think you understand how remarkable that was back in those times. Like, not to put Steve Nash down at all whatsoever, but in the years before he won MVP, everybody looked at Steve Nash as your typical, maybe an above average point guard. He's good. He's not remarkable, but he's good. He's an all-star, but he's not like the face of the NBA. He's not better than Kobe Bryant. He can't win games against players like Dirk Nowitzki. He's not even in the same class as Shaq and Kevin Garnett. And then he comes and wins back-to-back MVPs in this system. And if you pay attention, the NBA is making more of a shift towards pace. So in that sense, it makes sense because Steve Nash has had experience in successful up-tempo offenses and could potentially utilize that to his advantage. But on top of that, you have to factor in his experience with the Golden State Warriors more recently, and he probably was able to get a look at what they did properly and what they didn't do so properly, and was probably going to be able to integrate that into his head coaching style as well. There is definitely a familiarity between him and Kevin Durant as a result of this, because there's a lot of rumors going on about Kevin Durant handpicking Steve Nash as the next head coach. But I think it's really important to also get a head coach that both Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant respect. And I believe they did that by hiring Steve Nash, because at the end of the day, Kyrie Irving is probably not going to talk back to one of the greatest point guards of the past generation, and Kevin Durant has already had a good relationship with Steve Nash in years prior, so I think in that sense, it's a good hire. And at the end of the day, if you look at the alternatives to hiring Steve Nash, there was the rumor of the Nets trying to lure Greg Popovich out of San Antonio. I don't think that would have worked really well. I don't see Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving as functional members of the motion offense. And then there's rumors about Tyronn Lue. And with respect to Tyronn Lue, I have trouble seeing him as more than a head coach that was pretty much carried to a NBA championship by LeBron James, and that's no disrespect to Ty Lue. Maybe he's able to prove me wrong. I viewed Eric Spoelstra as the same exact type of head coach during his stint in Miami when he had LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. But look at him now. I think he's one of the best head coaches in the league. Look at the Miami Heat. They're one of the best coached teams in the NBA. So at the end of the day, this is a very high-risk hire, but I think if the Brooklyn Nets want to be successful, they need to make high-risk hires like this. They can't play it safe. You have Kevin Durant, you have Kyrie Irving, you have a tiny window of opportunity to win a championship. Bear in mind, Kevin Durant, at the time of this video, is 31 years old, and he's about to turn 32 years old by the end of this month. So, at the end of the day, the Brooklyn Nets probably have like a 2 to 3 year window to really make the most out of the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving core until, I don't know, I have trouble thinking Kevin Durant could be this effective past the age of 35, given that he already tore one of his Achilles. But let me know what you guys think about this hire in the comment section down below. Do you agree with it? And if you don't agree with it, who would you have hired instead to coach Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving? Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.